Hello, everyone. Welcome to the space. Thank you for being patient. This resonates so much with home funeral work, and we are trusting the process today. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started and dig into some information here that will hopefully be helpful in your practice. We're going to start. Thanks for being patient. There we go. Welcome, everyone. It's an honor to be in this space. I come to this space as a bereaved parent. I'm an end-of-life doula and a home funeral guide. And we are in this journey together and discovering more information about infant and child death care. Maybe you have experience, maybe you don't have experience, but our hope tonight is to connect with an overview and to also start dialogue of how to work with and help the population of infant and children. As we create our learning space today, it's a sacred space to learn and share. You're safe, and I trust that you all come here with wisdom and experience in your own way. We all come from different backgrounds, and we're here to share that energy. We will have a pause and connect section at the end. Feel free to type in the chat any questions. Lilani at the end of the presentation will go ahead and help moderate that for us. I know we started late and I can stay later, but we'll honor your time. If there is anyone that has to hop off of the meeting and still has questions, you can connect with me and I'll have my information at the end. We can either have a virtual meeting or you can call me. We'd like to also recognize that people might have experience personally with child loss and with family and community, and to please take care of yourselves in this time. Potentially triggering, we're going to be talking about infant and child death. We're also going to be seeing pictures of infants and children that have died in their care. If you need to look away or you need to pause and move away from the screen, please do that and take care of yourselves through this. You're safe here. And thank you for being in this space. If you're a bereaved parent, your support is greatly appreciated. And being mindful of our community diversity of experience and backgrounds. Some of us have served and some of us have not served before, and that's okay. And we're here to explore the space. I invite you to join me in this centering and grounding practice. You can mute me if there's a personal centering and grounding practice that you would like to experience on your own. This is part of opening up the space and learning and talking about some really heavy, serious and sad situations and experiences, and creating that mindfulness that we are people, we are human beings, and we have emotions. In this heart centering exercise, we're going to call attention to our heart and that emotional center, and that the heart has a neural pathway and 40,000 connection of neurons, and that's less than the brain, but 100 times more of the electromagnetic field. There's a lot of energy we carry here, and sometimes we are in our head space and we're not in our heart space, and we'll be connecting with our heart space today, and in that heaviness, and to be present and mindful and to thank our heart. I invite you to join me and to smile inwardly into your heart. And I'm going to invite you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And I will also recognize our heart. I see you. And then we'll thank our heart 5 times. And we'll walk through this exercise together. And again, if there's something different that you'd like to do, please do that for yourselves. Whatever helps you to enter this space of heaviness and sadness. Smile inwardly to your heart. You can hold your chest, where we hold our emotions. I see you. Thank you. 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 And one last cleansing breath. I see you. Thank you. We're ready to walk into the space. When we're working with people in death and holding space for that experience, especially with infants and children, I feel it's important that we acknowledge that grief and the grief journey and the grief processing and how we can frame that with pediatric path. Grief is an emotional and physiological response. So when we work with people, not only will there be sometimes numbness, anger, detachment, sometimes humor, but there's also things happening in the body, changing the way that people can respond, shock, trauma, all of it works together. And if we acknowledge that, we can address it and hold space for it. The onset of grief, especially with infant and children, if there's a diagnosis that's known or a traumatic event, is at that moment. As soon as life changes for the family, that is when the grief begins. Anticipatory grief, and we'll talk about this throughout our time together, is part of the ongoing process. Once a family knows, once parents know that their child is going to die, that they'll carry with them with those emotional and physiological responses that they won't be able to contain or to treat. It's to honor. Everyone experiences grief differently in their own timing, in their own way, and culture and family dynamics affect the outlooks of grief. And this is something that feels very important on my heart to share with everyone, that denial is a self-preserving reaction that helps with coping. When you're called in to work with a family, there might be that shock and trauma and not really connecting with what really just happened or what is happening. And that's part of that process. At a previous NHFA webinar, a former NHFA president, Danny Labor, shared with the group that healing is not always possible, but integration of grief and loss is. And in our community, in our child loss communities, telling story and validation helps us to integrate that grief and loss, which connects with community death care. And it's very similar to the art of kintsugi and the idea of taking something that's broken and making it beautiful and acknowledging that there are cracks, there are broken pieces, and that we can create something different and reframe the reality, and especially with home funeral work. I like to start with my own story, telling story birth to death, and my daughter Angelica. She was born in October of 2008, and she had a normal delivery. There were no issues. There were no indication that there was no indication that she would have any health difficulties, and that changed within a matter of 3 days. And I really love the mirroring of these two pictures, the birth bed and the deathbed, and she looks so natural and peaceful. And that's important for us to recognize that this is a reality for so many people, that it can be very shocking to folks to think that children do die and children do live lives that anticipate death, but it's part of the process. I had a normal pregnancy. Again, there was no indication that anything would be different. And I went into the delivery. It was 2 weeks overdue. I had the induction. It was planned. We stayed a little bit longer in the hospital because of some health issues with me, but she was fine. And within 24 hours of being home, what we later would find out would be her first metabolic episode. She had a genetic disorder called propionic acidemia, and the very breast milk that I was giving her was poisoning her, basically, and she became very acidotic. I remember being in the ambulance in shock. I couldn't say a word, and it was probably best, because I think that the instinct there was to scream, and I didn't know anything else to do for my child but to be present and just to be very quiet and to take in my surroundings and to do the best that I could. When we did arrive to the emergency room, it was very obvious that she could die at any moment. No one told us, but I did know in my own mother's energy and heart that this was a possibility as I watched all of these procedures happening. And the doctor turned to us and said, "Your baby is very sick." And that's all I needed to know in that moment. But I also was not really aware of what would happen afterward. There was no connection to what would we do if she died at that moment or shortly thereafter. But what ended up happening with Angelica is that she was able to overcome some really serious circumstances, and she was too sick to be in the neonatal ICU, and so we moved her to the PICU, to the pediatric ICU, and she had dialysis at 3 days old, and I knew as a parent that I had to bring something to the table that wasn't medical, and that was my care and observation and intuitive decision making. And before she had her central line, I stopped the doctors and I asked them to have her baptized. I called my priest who was in town and he came over pretty quickly and immediately and had her clinically baptized, because if she were to transition during any of those events, those medical procedures, I knew that I was going to be taking care of her in the best way that I could. And so this picture here on the right is the first time I held her after all of those procedures. And I had a child that I knew that was fragile, and we just were discharged shortly after, and we started our adventure. I worked through the frame of reference in my spiritual practice and how I raised my Angelica through Greek Orthodoxy. And that was something that I brought to the table with her baptism. I had a icon of the Virgin Mary in my purse that my grandmother had given me, and we affixed it to her crib. And so I knew that this was something that I could do. This was part of my community. And again, this was instinctual. No one told me what to do, but wow, it would have been really nice to have that extra support and knowing. And of course, if I wanted to bring her home, to have that information, but we didn't know it was going to happen. Life was simple and complex at the same time. And there was a lot of invasive communication from the medical community. I resigned to the idea that we were just going to go to a lot of clinics. We were going to be hospitalized quite a bit, and that was going to be life. And I wanted to normalize that as much as possible. And in that same idea that I knew that she could die at any time, there was no known prognosis. She was extremely fragile. I took care of her the best that I could. She had surgeries, and it was normal for her. It was normal for us, and she was a happy child, and we did the best that we could. And one of the things that came from all of this was I knew that I had to prepare her for the transition and not to be afraid. And I always promised her that I'd keep her home. And I didn't know how that was going to happen, but that was the promise I gave her. And I knew that at some point we would have to have those conversations. To acclimate ourselves, so those of you who have not been in clinical space, this is very normal. And for a parent that goes into these spaces, for families, community members, this is part of the process. We accept procedures as what they are, and to talk our children through it. This is traumatic, but we also have been prepared for this through our experiences. Angelica was thriving in her first, I want to say, about 6 months, and then she had that massive metabolic stroke that caused basal ganglia damage as her movement center. And she lost the ability to crawl, to sit up. She had creiform movements. That means she was always moving. She had involuntary movements, facial expressions. And so again, this idea that this can happen at any time, but the idea of how do we plan for a home funeral? What do we do? She's not ready for hospice. All of that was still in the background. That anticipatory grief was, again, playing, taking her out on outings. She loved to go shopping, sitting with her and just enjoying her at the same time. So there's this idea of straddling these two worlds and not knowing, again, when to bring up this conversation and how to bring up the conversation. Hospital was home for us. We spent a lot of time there. And it was actually a break from everyday routine. People brought us medications. We were able to nap and play, and especially when it was a maintenance, we called them tune-ups, when she just needed fluids, and we would hang out in the hospital until she was ready to go home. The traumatic events were a different story, though. But I knew that if she died in the hospital, that would be okay, and that I had come to terms with that as a parent. In the last year of my daughter's life, she had a horrific experience, medical experience that really surprised us, because she had been thriving. She had been sitting up on her own. Her movements had become minimal. We were hopeful that she was going to start walking. She was showing us all of those signs. And within one day, she became septic, and we changed the course of her care. Again, it was a new normal, a new baseline, and she had to have dialysis again. She was in the ICU for over a month, and she also coded during that time. She flatlined, and we didn't know how that was going to work. She was resuscitated, and I always listened to my child. I knew that she still wanted to be with us, so I didn't sign any paperwork for DNI or DNR, and we just went with it, and I let her tell us. And my child was primarily nonverbal, and she was able to communicate with us. And in the ICU, the last time that she was admitted, she was showing a lot of lab anomalies. There was no explanation for what was going on in her body. In fact, we were in a teaching hospital, so the residents would come by and kind of say, "Wow, this child is still alive," and so it was unexplainable of how that was going on. And again, those conversations weren't happening of, how can I take my child home? This is what I want to do. Angelica at this point did not want to continue with any invasive treatments. And in fact, in this picture, the nurse had to create barriers because she tried to escape. And so this was the last time, and this was closer to the end. Oops. While she was going through all of this, she was still going to school and doing her thing with her community. She was very social. We tried to keep her in school as much as possible. That was her place to be independent. And here I was, a parent sending my child to school that could die at any time and still have to do it, and to give her that opportunity to live fully. And we created these rituals where I would say goodbye to her, and I'd kiss her hand and say, have these kisses, and if something happens, mommy's always with you. And we had the idea that the school knew that we wanted to have a home funeral. We did start talking about it a little bit and how we were going to go about it. We again still had not signed any paperwork for DNI or DNR. So it's showing you again how this process is so fluid and it changes, and there's really no linear way to having these conversations and discussions. She was up for a transplant, and later to find out that she wouldn't qualify. And that was a conversation that we had to have. And I asked her about it, and she did not want to go through it. And I explained it in her own language, and she let me know that that was not an option. And so it's interesting, because this last clinic visit, she was actually starting in the dying process. Her kidneys were starting to fail. That was ultimately what was going to be the organ that was going to fail first. And so she looks great. She's happy. And again, we still did not have those conversations. She did have one last hospitalization, and that is when we finally said enough is enough. And I found an attending who listened and understood where my frustration was at. And we did sign the do not resuscitate and do not intubate papers, and started to have those conversations that we're not going to do any more dialysis. She's done. Her kidneys are failing. That's it. We're not doing transplant. So let's go on to the next steps, and this is what I want. And in fact, in that team meeting, when hospice was introduced and we started talking about the end and her home funeral, the conversation was lively. At that point, everyone was trying, all hands on deck, trying to help us out. And it was definitely a long time coming. And I wish that we would have had those conversations a lot sooner, because in my anticipatory grief as a parent, it really was very distressing. And I knew that my child needed that reassurance that we were going to go through with this. And I did the best that I could to let her know that without knowing the outcome. And when she was in hospice, life was different. It was, one moment she was not having any energy. She was lethargic. And other moments we were going out and playing, and she was walking her path, and we were visiting, her favorite garden, and that's how the end was basically. And this was the last day that she was fully present with us, and she chose to go to church. She got up early. She let us know. We got her dressed, and we had a play date. And before we were able to connect with the family that was going to come over for the play date, she just slept, and that was it. And we knew that was part of the active dying process. She had only one more walk out, and then in that Monday before she died on a Thursday, I helped her labor through that dying. And it was a lot more peaceful at this point, because I had already talked to a home funeral guide. Within that first 24 hours, I reached out. I was able to connect, and we had a visit. It was about an hour long, and we received some information. I'm of Greek heritage, and I know that it's possible. I've seen home funerals. I know what they're like. I just didn't know how that was going to unfold here, and we're in the state of Michigan, so we needed a funeral director involved, and the home funeral guide was able to connect us with a funeral home that would be helpful to us and let us keep her in the home. And that was so peaceful and so helpful for us, and she was just so relaxed, and and it's a testament to raising her in a way that she knew that she was going to be okay. In fact, I included this picture because it's very telling about the wisdom of our children, especially dying children, is that on her deathbed, she wanted to hold her baby, and she always had a baby, and during procedures, she'd hold her baby and tell her baby that everything was going to be okay. And before the day before she became unconscious, she was holding her baby, and she was telling her baby everything was going to be okay. So I knew in my mother's heart that she was ready, and everything was in motion. She had a beautiful death. It was very peaceful. She did end up dying from the kidney, the kidney failure. There were other concerns that she could have died in a horrific way, and so it was very peaceful. And when she died, we were ready. We had everything ready. She picked out her dress. She had her shoes laid out. She knew what she was going to have in the casket. We had her pick that out. The linens were ready. I even ironed the linens while she was dying, because she knew that when Mama was ironing, that we were getting ready to go somewhere or do something, and she knew that I was ready too, that I was preparing for her to leave, and she had full permission, and she actually reposed with a smile. It was an amazing experience as a parent to witness that, and after all of that, almost 7 years of uncertainty, it worked out. And it was an organic unfolding. I received that information on how to take care of her body, but I just instinctually knew I didn't have to read any paperwork. I just really got in there, held her, took care of her, and just followed my heart. And she had returned to a natural state of being, and it was very peaceful. I sat vigil with her all night, and this picture is when the sun came in, and it was an amazing experience. The funeral director came to the house, filled out the paperwork, and told us I can be as involved as you'd like, or you call me. I'm 20 minutes away. We took care of it. He did coach us, and this helped me, and subsequently with other families, that because she died of kidney failure, her abdomen was swollen, and he coached us we used dry ice because of the disease process. We placed the dry ice right onto the abdomen in a folded towel, and it helped to relieve that swelling and pressure. She did over freeze, but we were able to cut back the dry ice, but we needed to get to that point so that we knew that she would be okay for the vigil, and we had her home for a couple days. We had over 150 people coming into our home. We had the prayer service, we had 2 priests come in for the prayer service. We live in a modest ranch home, and so not everyone could fit in the living room, but we opened the window, people were out in the yard, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful party for her. Kids were running around. It really was very relaxing. And I knew that I had completed what I had to do as a mother before she was transported for the ceremony at the church. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm here with you all today. This path has been an amazing path. I've learned quite a few tips and strategies throughout this time, mostly from the families that I work with, and from experience in reading and networking with other guides and doulas. It's beautiful work, and it's uplifting. And I know that in this information that we are going to continue to receive tonight and in the recording, that you can take this back to your communities, whether you're going to be directly serving infant or pediatric patients. And so just to give us a time frame, a developmental time frame of how we work with pediatric stages, it's the perinatal, before birth, infancy, toddler, early to late childhood, adolescence, and adults 18 to 21 plus. And so there are adult pediatric patients because they've outlived the prognosis of their conditions. And because the advancement of medicine and care, some patients still stay with their pediatric doctors because the adult physicians do not know how to treat these pediatric illnesses, although there is a movement to help transition in a better way. And there's folks out there, physicians, other teams working to help families feel more comfortable on the adult side of the hospitals than the pediatric side that they're used to, because most often a lot of the teams have been caring for children in their adulthood since infancy. So there is a bond there too. For us as guides and practitioners, just for knowledge, the different death scenarios to help us to frame what we can expect. We have miscarriage medical procedures, and that's before the birth. There's stillbirth and born without breath. Life-limiting conditions like genetic disorders, congenital heart diseases, that there's not a known prognosis like my own child, but there is going to be a short life. Traumatic event or accident like a car accident or accidental death. Terminal illness like a cancer diagnosis or kidney disease that cannot be treated at the end stage. Sudden death, like SIDS, for example, and of course there are children that die for unexplained reasons. Maybe there was an undiagnosed condition, and we've heard those stories as well, and that does happen. And then there's death by suicide, and that is also part of that process and acknowledgement of how children die. It's interesting because when we're working with pediatrics, when we're working with infants and pediatrics, we have to carve that space in the mainstream systems, because we're not mainstream. We're still working to be acknowledged as being a part of the team and bringing something to the table, and acknowledging again that we can help families plan ahead and to have seamless transitions, or when we show up in these clinical spaces that we're trusted. And that's difficult especially in pediatric hospitals and those spaces, because outside people and outside consultants are not always trusted easily. And there is doubt there, and that's why we do this education. That's why we get out there and we create these relationships so that people know that we exist and that we're there to help. There's that delicate balance of diplomacy with caregivers, providers, and the age-related needs of the children, and being aware of that. Initiating the support plans that are holistic. The essential support structures, and we'll take a look at the different parts of that, include school if it's a school-age child, and having folks on board at the school, knowing that what your plans are and what people's plans are for their children if the death occurs at school. The same diagnoses or conditions do not always have a defined outcome. So, for example, in the propionic acidemia community, there are kids that are in the same family that have the same condition, but they present differently. Some are more fragile, and some are more of maintenance. And so, it's an interesting situation, especially when people are working with advanced care planning. Advancement of medical protocols, as we touched upon with the adult pediatrics, really does change the landscape of care plans and end-of-life timelines. Sometimes children appear to be on the deathbed, and then they turn around with a treatment. And so you might be called in, and there's the anticipation of death, and then that changes, and that's part of that process too. The disease process stages vary. There's the chronic illness, like diabetes, for example, if it goes uncontrolled, or there's a secondary issue that can cause death, and also how the body reacts when we are working with families and coaching them on how to care for the bodies. There's the life-limiting conditions, the serious illnesses, end-stage illness, like the cancer diagnoses, and again, the body presents differently. There might be sores, there might not be, there might be open lines. Experimental treatments can affect and compromise the integrity of the body and how the process is after death. Transplants definitely make the body more fragile at death if a death occurs after a transplant. And life support, like a ventilator or dialysis, you have the tubing, and so that creates some scenarios to consider as well. And when we're going into these clinical spaces, collaboration and partnership is going to be the most important thing. Even though we're not always going to be welcomed or trusted, we know that we can increase that child and family support. And how do we define family? The family is defined by the bond and relationship with the child, and that can be biological, blended, or chosen. And family recognizes all gender identities, sexual orientations, experiences, and situations. And just acknowledging that family is defined by the people experiencing it is important for us to be able to advocate for them and to gain trust. In medical institutions and clinical spaces, there are gaps in care, and that's part of the process because there's so many moving parts. And so people are well-intentioned, and there might be a bystander effect. So maybe the family mentioned to chaplain or social worker, we would like to have a home funeral for our child, or we'd like to care for the body bedside, or we would like to have a compassionate transport home to care for the body. Those conversations might not always be shared, and that can cause a lot of frustration. So for us as practitioners or helpers, guides, we can go in and look for those opportunities to support and to see where those gaps of care are, so that there's a continuity of care for the advanced care planning, if that's possible, if we're in that stage, or when we're called to a traumatic situation or a crisis situation, we can look for those different moving parts and see where we can connect everything to help families. And it's really interesting because people really don't want to talk about infant and child death care, even though it's there, even in places where it happens. People go silent. And I remember the last rounds in the pediatric ICU for my daughter. I was the one to bring up, well, perhaps you're witnessing the system failure, the beginning of system failure. I let them know that I think my child is dying. Every eyeball went to the floor, and I was embarrassed, to be quite frank, because I didn't know how to proceed with the conversation. No one wanted to talk about the fact that my child could die, even though I brought it up. And so that does happen quite a bit, and that's something to consider in having in background knowledge when supporting families, that maybe they tried to have these conversations, and that might add to that frustration and sometimes anger. When we're talking about community death care, it connects support systems and respects those options. It increases that equitable access. People get what they need, how they need it. Now, usually there's a go-to funeral home or a go-to institution for grief, but that might not resonate and connect with the people that are being served or that are asking for help. And so really getting in there and finding out what they need, it helps, in that idea of seeking understanding and empowering the circles of care. the people taking care of the family, the child. Now, empower can be a controversial word, but it's helping people come into their own power. And I know I certainly needed that. And so that if that helps to think about it that way, that when people are stuck or in trauma or in stress and fatigue and they're working and they're taking care of medically fragile or sick children, or they've had this sudden situation happen and there's other children at home, when we're working and helping and being there and holding space, empowering is important. And it's holistic, it's that big picture. When we're working with community death care, we're talking about us, we, and our. It's about telling story, and that's how we share. Listening to stories, reading stories. There's people that I've connected with in my own community that I wasn't their doula or home funeral guide that have said, "Wow, Toula, those stories really help when I read them online or when I go into these Facebook groups. I feel seen, I feel heard." And that's part of that, and letting people know that their stories are important. Sharing resources, so important for all of us to share these resources and to know what exists to help support families the best that we're able. Viewing cultural competency as an ethical obligation. And I'm going to say this one again because we all need to hear it, even including myself, views cultural competency as an ethical obligation. And that includes all cultures, all backgrounds. If we don't know how to support or serve a family, then it is our job to find out how. And if we're unable to, for whatever reason, then it's our ethical responsibility as guides, as practitioners, as helpers, as community members to find who can. That's part of it. Rituals are sacred, whether they're planned or they unfold organically. They're sacred practices in community death care. Pediatric circles of support or circles of care, this list is not exhaustive. We can always add, and there's so many different people that help and support depending on the situation, depending on the stage of illness. I'd like to also mention, if you're not aware, that there's a hospice concurrent care. There are children that are admitted into hospice, and then they can be treated into the hospital setting for comfort, for treatments, whatever they're receiving. They need to be discharged from hospice, they're admitted to the hospital, and then they're readmitted into hospice. And the folks that help take care of them are the pediatric palliative care team, if they're available and if they're connected with them. These are going to be the folks that are going to be our allies as non-mainstream people that are going in and helping. The pediatric palliative care team has always been open, that I've worked with, been open to and referred families to me whenever they hear home funeral. We get contacted, and we have folks in our community that are contacted to help. And it really does mirror community death care, about coordinating care, holistic approach, advocacy. And then what's really important is that the palliative care team will also seek medical and non-medical comfort. And that's a lot of the doula care too. And I'll be talking more about that at the NIDA webinar next month. Addresses spiritual and emotional spaces, part of that practice, and acknowledging that this is important to families, to children, that they are seen and heard in what they need, and that hope is not always in the form of a cure. And so death does happen. They are the people that really do understand this. And I wasn't plugged into the pediatric palliative care team until very much later, basically when Angelica was dying. So if I had been connected to them before, and there's a big story to that, then I think that part would have been a lot smoother in planning for her home funeral. Dialogue is important, and that's what the peds palliative care folks do, and that's what we do. We talk, we seek understanding, and we think holistically. We're making connections. We develop that shared meaning to seek understanding. Part of that conversation with families, even in a crisis situation. We go in there, whether you want to call it an assessment or find out what's going on, that is important for us to have that dialogue so that the decisions can happen for families in the best way for them. Even if it's not possible to have a home funeral, let's say that a child needs to have an autopsy, or the child has to have some sort of cosmetic assistance, then that's important for us to bring that into that dialogue, so a decision can be made that best helps the family reframe their experience into something where they can create memories with their infant or their child. If it's possible, giving the child voice is so important to plan for their own funerals, if it's possible. Even nonverbal children and children with different cognitive abilities, they know. It's the energy. Even babies, they know there's an energy there, and being able to connect families with their children, with the situation, and even in a perinatal care, when you're guiding birth parent or the family community, it really does help to have the conversation that your intuition is important. Listen to your child, feel your child's energy, and that helps to empower and to inform. And that really, it does create a space of love and understanding that, you know, I'm going to do the best that I can, and this is going to be out of love and understanding. And that's important for us to think about as practitioners, that it's the decision of the family. And if it's not something that we personally would advocate for, that's a boundary, right? And so it is part of that process. And if possible, I'll talk more about this next month, and you'll have access to the orange binder. You can add death care information. I only had a part on the cover to contact a priest in case of life or death situation, so that if Angelica was taken to the hospital and she was dying, that they'd call Father Nick and all of his numbers. But now looking back, I would have loved to have had more death care information and how to comfort her, how to help her in that transition if she were to die at school or on the bus in a field trip. You know, those are realities for us. Advanced care directives, it is stuff that conversation is happening more, and I'm hearing that more in webinars and different spaces, that we're talking more about advanced care directives early on, because those conversations can be revisited, and that's how funeral planning can be revisited. This is what we'd like, maybe that'll change. And so children can complete living wills, and especially older children, they have a more sophisticated worldview, and they have more sense of impact. Likewise, children will also protect their families from their own dying process sometimes, so that they might not say that they're hurting, or that they feel like that it's time. And that's part of that protection, because of the bond and the love there and the respect. Physician order of life-sustaining measures and a medical order of life-sustaining measures. The DNI is the do not intubate and do not resuscitate. All of these help us as guides to know the language when you're going to a foreign country. Knowing that those key words will be helpful in navigating the system and helping your families. So if a family does have a pulse, you can say, you know what, they have a pulse, and so we're ready to help with the next steps. So either if the child is going to go directly home, if you live in a state that you're able to do that, or that we're going to contact a funeral director to help us transport to the home if it's possible. These are also some important phrases to take a look at, especially with infants in the neonatal ICU. Zone of parental discretion. Sometimes there's conflict. Oftentimes there's conflict with what the family wants to do, what the community wants to do, and what the physicians are suggesting. And so that's part of that conversation. There are gray areas, and there are ethics committees. And Michelle Achavadi, who I'm working with on a guidebook now for the NHFA, was an ethicist at Children's in Boston, and so just listening to her stories and understanding from that end of there are some very difficult decisions that need to be made, and there's quite a bit going into that process, and sometimes the families don't have the full story, and so just knowing that happens. So talking about the technical and how to cool the body in the hospital setting, the best thing to do is to cool the room right away, to have the air conditioning on as high as possible. even if there's a cuddle cot, because most often the cuddle cot is a refrigerated bassinet. There's different presentations. There might be a basket, but it's refrigerated. It's about 45 degrees. Families will often hold the baby, and so and that's okay if that's what they prefer to do, and that's going to change skin color, and also maybe if there's rigor that happens during that time. It's really following the family and understanding that this is their grieving process, and we can coach them the best that we're able to if we see something that's going to be most helpful for them, but it's ultimately their decision. And so the cuddle cot has become a lot more popular. Sometimes they're not available outside of the maternity wards, and so or it's very difficult to ask for them when an infant dies on a regular floor or in the pediatric ICU. Some hospices have them, some communities have them. There's definitely more awareness of what a cuddle cot is. There are families that have experienced infant death that this has helped them so much, and so they do fundraisers and donate as part of the legacy of their child. Techni ice is also really helpful if people are not open to dry ice or dry ice is not available. Techni ice comes in these sheets that you can cut, and you immerse them into water, and the cells swell up. I like to have some available, especially if I'm working with a family and I know that death is imminent. I always have some in the freezer. And then in the spirit of community death care, there's been times where I knew I was going to be out of town, and I always have, or even if I'm at work and somebody needs Techni ice, I always have sheets accessible near my home, and I'll instruct folks to come pick up the sheets, and then there's instructions there. I can walk them through that. And so it's really nice to order and have on hand, where you always have that available. Cooling packs, all of that. It does sweat, and so that can cause some issues. If you wrap it up, that can help too. You can keep more in the freezer so that you can switch on and off. You can reuse them, and so that's very helpful as well. Dry ice is not always available. You can buy dry ice at certain grocery stores or party supply stores, as well as dairies. Dairies will have dry ice and sometimes sell to the public. And dry ice needs to be it's dangerous. You have to coach through. If you are helping a family, then you know what to do. Remind them not to touch the ice. And of course, opening windows when possible, being careful for the condensation and over freezing. If you're coaching a family to use dry ice on their own, then you can give them some tips and help and with that. What I usually do is place the dry ice in a bag like this, and then smash it on a cement, and then use the pieces. If it's a smaller infant, then you can place little pieces in some like heavy cloth, so it doesn't over freeze or burn. But it's nice for advanced stage processes like the disease processes where there's open wounds or there's been tubing lines removed, as well as children that have had advanced decomposition. The skin changes for swelling, autopsy, the organ donation. Dry ice is very helpful, but some people don't want to use it, and that's honored too. It's something that can come to the table. When handling dry ice, it's important to have certain types of gloves. These are used for welding. They were given to me, and these are the ones that I use where I can touch the dry ice, but any thick style glove like leather glove can be used for that as well. Checking in on time to honor that. So this is in the guidebook, and it really calls attention to, especially if there are birth doulas joining us, this is not prescriptive. And so every situation is different. You're going to do the best that you can and follow the lead of the family in the situation. Home funerals are possible in that first trimester in the 8 to 12 weeks. And it's important to have those conversations with staff. If you are helping a family, if you're a friend, a family member, community member, a guide, Tissue preservation is the goal, and so it's not always a fetus that looks like a baby, or it looks more like a blob, but that can be very meaningful and helpful for families to preserve that tissue. Advanced preparation is helpful, but not always possible. And of course, notifying circles of care, whoever the family needs support from through that process, or the birthing parent. Strainers may be used over toilet bowl, bucket, or tub to help collect the tissue. And so there's these collapsible models that are transportable. Let's say if this is happening somewhere like work or something like that, where a person does not have an opportunity to be at home, and then having some sort of container to keep the tissue in is helpful. In the 3 to 7 months, this is before a fetus is considered stillbirth. There is a practice where the fetus can be placed in a glass container with oops, my apologies. With saline solution, and that immersion helps to really freshen the skin and the color of the baby, and so that the family can interact with the fetus, with the baby in a different way. And so pictures are usually taken, and so minimal handling of the body is advised, but that's a boundary that's not for us to control as guides, as helpers. It's what the family wants. And so there are some live links here. Throughout the slideshow, there are live links that you can explore on your own as well. And so just to show us a little bit of what that might look like, and you can explore the story as well on your own. Oh, I'm going to have to continue. So I will have you do that. Let's see if this will allow me. To give us a better look at what that might look like. And again, that interaction, home funerals are possible, and so there might be some malformations. Babies have all kinds of presentations with that, with the different medical issues that are diagnosed or undiagnosed. After 6 months, labor and delivery support is required, whether it's hospital or home. There could be different scenarios. Sometimes people know what the condition of the body will be. Sometimes there's an unknown. Maybe there's missing organs. Maybe there's not fully formed bodies. Sometimes organs are outside of the body, and that's very possible as well. And that might need help with cosmetic assistance if there's going to be home funeral planned. Interacting with the body is still possible at any time, though, especially in the hospital and the deathbed. The bodies are fragile, but again, guiding the family through what works best for them. I've walked into situations where there's been rigor and the body does look different, and the family is okay with that, and really advocating and saying this is what the family wants. This is okay. So again, it's not prescriptive. It's really different for each situation, and asking questions and even reaching out to people that may be more experienced, or looking up information. It really is about empowering ourselves and empowering others. I'd like to thank the families that gave me permission to share their stories. Again, telling story is powerful and important. It's part of our communities, our death care communities. It's our tradition. And so not only are we telling the stories, we're holding the space for families that weren't served and families that will be served. This is Princess Evie. She was the first baby that I worked with as a new home funeral guide. I was called in from the Children's Hospital. They were trying to search for a home funeral guide a colleague and mentor and colleague was on vacation and has a website, and so she was not reachable. And down the line, I got connected, and it had been about 5 hours since Evie died, and so there was rigor, there was discoloration, there was no cuddle cot available, there was no cooling. But while mom knew what to do, and in fact, mom said, "I'm not leaving this hospital without my baby." Evie was born with a life-limiting condition, and it was a known during the pregnancy that she could be a stillborn. She did live in about I want to say 9 months, and so 9 to 10 months, and it was just a horrific and amazing journey for her mother, and she cared for her every day. She was not separated from her child. She said, "I will not have anyone pick up my child. I want to take my child home." Do you know anything about a home funeral? So when I was called, and I have to say this because again, it's part of that narrative, that changing the narrative, right? You know, I spoke at the same hospital and had connections with people that knew the work that I did, and still there again, all those moving parts. Some people know, some people don't. In the heat of the moment, these are the protocols, these are the procedures, and so that's really not important. It's just going in there, showing up, and respecting the space, and knowing that this is going to take time before it's more mainstream. And so when I walked into the room, there was powerful mother's love, and she was holding and caring for her child. She wanted to do an outfit change. And so because of the rigor, she figured it out. I asked her, "Can I touch the baby?" Whenever I'm working with a family, I always ask, can I approach your child? Can I touch your child? But really it was all her. And witnessing her instinctual care for Evie, it was just amazing. It took some advocacy, negotiation. People really pulled together because staff had worked with Princess Evie since infancy, since she was born. Basically, they really wanted to make this happen for Evie and her mom, and so it was a beautiful collaboration. You know, and what was really nice too was that people were looking to the home funeral guide for support, and so as a death doula as well, and just really seeing the whole picture. There was a lot of validation for what we do in this clinical setting. It just was seamless and natural. And it's like we're helping a family, and that's what it's all about. That collaboration piece. Without collaboration, their system collapse, right? And so, taking a look at Evie's home funeral, it was planned all by mom, and she just knew. She had talked about it when we were in the hospital waiting for transport from the funeral director. I did want to also mention that the funeral director was not going to take direct transport. He was very concerned about the condition of the body. There had been some liquid, some purging, and mom was just tenderly taking care of her. She didn't want her cooled too much, but we did towards the end after she had held her and napped with her. So the funeral director was like, I want to take the baby home. I want to take the baby to the funeral home to do some work, and then we can take the baby to the house. And so there was again that advocacy, and I said, mom understands that the condition of the body is going to change, and so with the cooling, perhaps the body will freshen up a bit. Why don't we think about that? And so again, mom was also very vocal in asserting herself and in what she wanted, and the funeral director did say, okay, we'll do that. And he actually drove Evie's mom and her partner to the home, and so it worked out beautifully. The cremation was planned, and so mom went to the retort, and that was again coordinated with the funeral director, and that's what she wanted. Just a beautiful story of love and connection and advocacy. And in this testimonial, she talks about, Evie's mom talks about just how beautiful the home funeral was. And I'd like to read just a little bit of it. Once I made it home with my daughter for the home funeral, I was blessed with finally being able to mother my sweet angel without any medication, tubes or wires or medical machines. I was able to hold my baby with sunshine, caressing her beautiful skin, and without fear of her going into a seizure from the whole proencephaly. I was able to give her one last bath and paint her beautiful nails of princess purple. I dressed her up in a pretty tutu and onesie and combed her hair one last time. It was bittersweet, but I'm forever grateful for that moment. During that time, I had Evelyn home for the home funeral. I was able to have her home 4 days and 3 nights before her cremation. During that precious time, I celebrated her life fully. She was laid out beautifully in her pack-in place, surrounded by candles, lanterns, and flowers, and all of her stuffed animals and special things with beautiful music playing. I was even lucky enough to have someone come sing to her and play guitar at the home funeral. Evie loved music, and so I'm beyond grateful for the home funeral because it allowed me to make her end of life more beautiful than just the silence and walls of an unfamiliar place. Most importantly, she was surrounded by love within the walls of her home. Evie's mom, always Becca. It's just always gets me. I really this why we do this work is to help others do what they need to reframe their heavy experiences and their trauma and to create those memories. Princess Evie receives a tiara every year on her birthday, and those tiaras will eventually be donated to other children. So it's just again a beautiful testament to changing the narrative and normalizing the needs of a dying child. Becca and her partner really do so much to honor her legacy, and they sent me a picture of taking her urn to the beach because she always wanted to take her daughter to the beach, and she did. And the legacy artifacts here, and when we're in the clinical settings, to make sure that we are collecting these items, sometimes they do get left behind, or it's just they're not packaged in a way that will make it home appropriately, because there's so much activity and movement. And again, just to really ask for, and what is there something that we can take from the hospital, whether they're the beading or plaster casts or even locks of hair, and to remind folks to have that for the families. I'm being mindful of time. I'm just taking a look here. Baby Oliver, this was a really interesting situation, because this was the first time that I was contacted right after the diagnosis by a pediatric palliative care social worker who I'd worked with before. And she said, Toula, this family was really interested in a home funeral. Can you meet with them? And so there was a fatal diagnosis at the 20-week scan, and the family knew that there was going to be complications, and they really wanted to bond with their child, and they wanted that advanced care planning and to have those conversations, and they were at peace with that. And there really was an interesting situation, because the home funeral didn't happen. There was caring for the body in a home setting, but there was so many fluid changes. Okay, so that creating the space for the rituals, was going to be an organic unfolding, depending on how Oliver was going to come into the world, what his body was going to look like. And so Mom was the person in charge. I was providing guidance throughout the time with her. We spoke one time weekly, and so that helped us to have that trust and validating what was happening. And behind the scenes, I was really taking a look and seeing how we can coordinate that care. And there wasn't a death plan with the birth plan, so I connected with the social worker and said, Mom talked to me about a death plan, and again, respecting those boundaries that they had already initiated a birth plan. I talked with Mom what she can bring up for the death plan, and that was included. And so I did not insert myself into that as a guide, because again, it's empowering the family to have those conversations with the people that are helping them in the clinical settings. And so there was, again, not a known outcome of what the body was going to look like. There were different needs, and so there was a seamless transition for transport. But what ended up happening is that the funeral home that they really wanted to work with was a community funeral home. It was very trusted, and the funeral director really was not open to having the body not taken care of cosmetically or taken to the funeral home. And so we had those conversations, and so it ended up where Oliver was taken to grandma's house, and they were able to hold. And she said, "Toula, I was able to take my baby across the threshold, and that's really what I wanted to do." And again, it's not our wishes, even though that was the original intent to have a home vigil. That didn't end up happening, but something special did happen to make that connection and to create a memory for the family. And Oliver did live for two hours, so they had time with him for 2 hours, which was amazing. That wasn't anticipated, and again, part of that fluidity. And so they're part of their community connections, their circles of care. Their family had a close-knit family, a large family, their priest, a faith community, their pediatric palliative care team, the end-of-life doula, home funeral guide, and the funeral director all worked together to make this death plan happen. And they actually had a funeral the day before the shutdown of COVID, where there were no more events. So they were able to it was a definitely divine timing for them. This is Miss Lola. Lola died a couple days after Christmas. She was an unanticipated death, even though she had a genetic condition encoded before. She had a daughter, or excuse me, she had a sister that died 10 years earlier from the same genetic condition, but was on hospice. So the family wanted a home funeral. They knew it, but they were in a pediatric ICU, and Lola had a central line. She had a peritoneal dialysis tube. She was receiving dialysis at home. And so the family really wanted the tubing removed. And when I was called in, Lola had just transitioned. And they told me that their daughter had done the same thing, that the home funeral guide came right after the transition. So they didn't want us there, but that's okay. And so we have this idea, again, coming into these clinical spaces, it can be overwhelming, but really it's seeing the big picture. You're going in there to comfort the family, and getting an understanding. And so mom and dad knew that this hospitalization was different. So they had been prepared. They were still in shock, and they knew that her life would be short, but they didn't realize that this was going to happen. So they didn't know how to transition into home funeral space. And we started the process in the hospital room. They were familiar with it, and mom said that she didn't realize that the home funeral feeling could be in that space, and we were able to do that. And the ritual just unfolded naturally. It was organic. There in this uncertain situation, and holding that space and finding out what the family needed and working with the medical teams. People were in that spirit of, again, that collaboration, advocacy. All of it was happening to help the family create these memories right there bedside. I remember just how awesome the nurse was. At first, she was unsure. She didn't really understand what was happening. And once she understood, we were doting over the body and taking care of Lola, and she was talking to Lola and just being so gentle with her. And we were telling Lola what was happening, and that was so helpful to mom. And dad held space quietly. And that's how he supported what was going on. And I carry essential oils. I had mom choose the essential oils. She wanted to bathe Lola at home, and so we just did a bird bath, just kind of like a blessing, if you will. And we just had an emesis basin, and I held the basin, and we had the water in there, and mom just did so beautifully with some 4x4s, and just really caressed the body and really interacted with her child, and we talked, and she cried, and it was just, again, that bonding, that beautiful experience of community. And this was not planned. This was part of the process, and an organic process. And the medical piece of the central line, that was removed by the nurse, and there was a lot of blood. And so, just being prepared for that. And again, that's not something that we would do as guides, helpers, but that is something that can be advocated for. And the family knew that there would be blood, and then there was a process of really holding pressure and making sure in my work, I really was cognizant of that as we were moving the body, so that it can minimize the appearance of the blood, so just for the family's experience as well. And the peritoneal tube needed to be removed with surgery, and the family compromised with the team that they would clamp it. And so even though they wanted it removed, it just was going to cause some further issues. And because of my experience with my daughter that had a feeding tube, I was able to coach Lola's mom through how to work the G tube and to drain the liquid at home if there was anything. Perhaps she was third spacing and there was free fluid, and then that could be going in through her abdomen. So it was just, again, through experience, through a knowing, and through connection. And then advocating for the transport home with Miss Lola, it was just an amazing experience, because she was not covered. She was not in a body bag. We requested no body bag that was supported. And we did have to transport her to the morgue entrance for the funeral director to take her home. Her dad did not want her to be alone, and so he walked beside her, and we had stuffed animals arranged. The nurse came in and put a yellow flower in her hair. Just was, again, this beautiful community effort. And we processed through the hospital. It was open, and people really stopped and paused and realized that, wow, this child is dead. And it was just, there was something ethereal and very, very beautiful, and just a very different experience for a lot of people that changed their way of thinking, that this wasn't something that should be covered. This was important. And then the slides you'll be able to see. I know that we're running close on time. I'd like to honor some of the family stories. If you need to hop off of the meeting, then this will be in the recording. And then of course you can contact me for questions and guidance if you are interested. Amaru died of SIDS during the pandemic. It was a shock. Her mom's a social worker and a community activist, and so there was a lot of trauma there. Mom and dad were taken to the police station. Amaru's body was taken to the hospital and then sent to the county morgue, where she was admitted as a Jane Doe and lost for a couple weeks. So part of our work was to help return the body home. We worked with a funeral home that was very helpful with that. And the return home was just an amazing thing to witness. And this is Mom, Rachel, received her child with such love, and this was what she needed, and to change and reframe that traumatic experience, the traumatic experiences that she had to endure with her partner, Lawrence. And so because Amaru had to be autopsied, she was shrouded. The funeral director sutured her, and we had requested for hair clippings before the shroud. So he brought in a separate container the hair clippings for the family to have. And the mom and dad were able to really spend time and to enjoy that peace and the presence, and to reflect and to create those memories. And the funeral was outdoors. So after the funeral, they returned to the bedroom and were able to spend time, and other family members came in and also held that space. We did use dry ice. I coached the community on how to use it, and so now they know, and that was a beautiful thing. This community was very strong, a blended spiritual practice of African religion and indigenous culture. There was a sacred fire, and so the bassinet was close to the sacred fire. It was July in Michigan, very hot and humid. I coached to add extra dry ice in the bassinet. We covered with enough blankets, like thicker blankets, thicker towels, so that wouldn't ruin the bassinet, and to ensure that the body would be preserved integrity wise, and that there wouldn't be decomposition in those elements. The community came together and just held space, and so beautiful. It was an amazing thing. Following all COVID protocols, there was social distancing. Dad made the urn, and so that just was part of the ceremony and ritual as well. There was drumming. It was just, again, very, very beautiful, and connecting the family with what they needed with their own community, and not outside people, just enough outside assistance to have them create the memories that they wanted to reframe their experience. This is the last family story. This is baby Vigo and his peaceful transition. I met Vigo's mom via phone after he was born in January, last January. And she wanted a home funeral. She had known about them, and he had a very rare condition. Not very much was known about it and how that would unfold. Just his breathing was very labored. It was possible that they would need to trach him, and that was a decision in the back of their mind if they wanted to do that in his advanced care planning. And so we just connected mostly by text. Following mom connected with me when she needed. And I was updated on certain medical events, so to be prepared. And then in the meantime, I was also was speaking with the funeral director, and he was so understanding. He knew that we didn't know when the funeral was going to happen. We didn't really have a conversation. Mom was not ready to talk about it, and it wasn't until I want to say April that we had a conversation, and it was an acceptance that this was going to happen, and it was in her own timing. And again, that was very limited, and in honoring that the conversation, it was just enough information where I could go with the next steps in the funeral director, and we just held that space. And when Vigo was ready to transition, we would have some information to support them, and then just see what would happen. Again, following the family. Sometimes we can't pre-plan, and it really is what they need. Vigo died last July. In fact, it was interesting. I was getting ready for a trip to Greece to leave for a month, and I just knew instinctually, we don't talk about this very much in our work, but we can work in our instinct and our intuition, that I needed to have everything ready. As soon as I put my suitcases into the living room, it was about 2 in the morning, I got a call from Vigo's mom that they had been in the emergency room and they were in the trauma area, and that they were going to be transported to the pediatric ICU, and that it was very uncertain of what was going to happen. And I told her, call me when you're ready to have me. I'll be there. I lived about less than 10 minutes from the hospital, and I was starting to get things ready. And when she called, they had him on an ambu bag, and they were just holding that space, and they waited for me. And when I came in, I really was more the participant observer. I was at the foot of the bed, and just this beautiful unfolding of how they cared for him and sang Amazing Grace and just surrounded him with so much love. Vigo was ready to go, and he just, as we say in Greek, he went like a bird. He was just very, very peaceful. He took one last breath, and so that was just beautiful for the family to witness too, because he had some horrific medical situations where he could have died in a very invasive or a very difficult way. And with Vigo, his disease process was pretty advanced. He had a swollen abdomen, but the most important part was just having the family spend time with the body, with the baby. And I had the staff cool the room right away. We weren't sure how everything else was going to unfold. So there's this balancing, again, that diplomacy and seeing what's happening. How can we help this family? And really getting out there. I had to talk with the social worker. It was overnight, so people were really not knowing what to do. And I said, we're on the same team. We really want to support this family. I've done this before. This is legal. And again, going through that dialogue, and pediatric palliative care is aware of their wishes. And so, again, knowing that information was important, and it really came down to the family being able to just spend time. And one of the most rewarding parts of this work is witnessing that, and in knowing that these heavy experiences again are reframed, and there's memory making that's more positive, and even though it's very sad and heavy, that this is the wishes of the family. With Vigo, we had activated ice from the hospital, the bags where you pop, and we were able to keep him cool. The room was cooled. I noticed that his abdomen was swollen, so we put some ice, and I coach families to do the work. And so, and again, asking if they want me to do it, if they're inviting me, but the most important thing, if they feel empowered to do that. Grandpa was laying next to Vigo, and I said, Grandpa, can you check his abdomen? Would you think that the swelling has gone down? He checked it, and he said, yeah, the swelling's gone down. So we can take the ice off. We can take that ice pack off. And I had him look at the skin. Mom and Dad were picking up the other children to come see Vigo in the transition room. And you know, he was discolored in certain areas, and we used a heavy, like a emollient moisturizer, and the family was rubbing the lotion, and it helps with the discoloration. And again, just the organic unfolding, and people that knew Vigo and loved Vigo in the hospital came to visit him. I had the nurse call the Peds Palliative Care service, so that when people came in for their shift, that they were able to come say goodbye. The family doesn't have the presence of mind at that point, and they need to see the people that have been helping them and taking care of them, and the people that have been taking care of them need to have that space to grieve and to connect as well. I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of lavender. I always like to bring organic material into the space if it's possible. If you have a garden, or if you dry any herbs or flowers, to have that in your storage. It's really nice for the families to see that, and for the staff too. And I was fortunate enough to just grab the lavender from my garden fresh, and it was very fragrant, and people just paused and really had that sensory connection. And you know, it was again looking at not only a body but a baby, and really connecting with the idea that home funeral is a natural process. I'll talk more about bereavement in the NEDA webinar next month. And really for us, the advocacy parallels the activism. When we get into these clinical spaces, and you can take a look at this chart on your own as well, you know, we recognize that even in the cultural competencies that the institutions, these mainstream systems, there's a lot of fear and unknowns. And so for us to go in and to understand that and not to be combative, it helps to teach as well, and to have that presence. And really, you know, those partnerships are so important, and the more education that we can bring into those spaces, and the more connections and people seeing us and hearing us and knowing that we exist, that we can help families, the more referrals that families will be connected with, just to know their options. It may not be for them, but they'll know their options. And you know, leaving you with this idea that we're cultivating practices that respect the rights of children. We stand in the truth of knowing what is legal and beneficial. We can find like-minded communities that promote education, and that includes mainstream systems. And I think that that's the most important part of this. We can show up in spaces with knowledge, story, and respect, and wherever we're at. And being a change agent takes patience and perseverance as part of the process, and trusting that, so that more people will have the help that they need and deserve. Thank you so much, everyone. I know that we're over time. Our children, our hearts, thank you for this time of connection.
Thank you so much, Toula, for your wisdom and for sharing your story and the stories of these wonderful and beautiful families today with us. And yes, we did get started a little late, so we can go if folks need to go, completely understandable if you need to go, because we're about 5 minutes past when we were going to end, but we can stay on for about 10 more minutes if folks have any burning questions. Toula also had included her email, which we can also put in the chat if you would like to follow up at another time as well.
Please, yeah, please feel free to do that. I'm not cool enough to have an assistant, so you'll get me directly.
And so, you know, since we just have a few minutes left, does anyone, if you'd like to raise your hand, or just, well, it's a small group, if you'd like to unmute yourself or put the question in the chat. Is there anyone who has a question who'd like to go first? And also just to acknowledge that I know this was a heavy topic, and so sorry, my cat decided to make an appearance while I'm talking. If folks needed some time and you need to, you know, to
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This information, it marinates and
Yeah.
it settles, and things will come up. And please, again, be gentle with yourselves, especially if you've experienced child loss or if you've been connected to it in a certain way. You might have those feelings and flashbacks, and so know that you're being held in this space.
Yeah. I see that Jackie, you raise your hand if you'd like to unmute.
Hi, thanks, Toula. I'm from Australia. So that was beautifully presented. Thank you. And hearts out to you for Angelica and all the families you supported. I'm exploring a home funeral guide. I'm an end-of-life doula here in Australia and a funeral celebrant, but exploring more in the home funeral guide space. And particularly looking at pediatrics, which I haven't done anything with regards to my doulaing. But wondering, and sorry to jump to this side of it, but when you say people were texting you or you were available for people through a part of the journey, either early on after diagnosis or upon a child dying or after death, do you always charge for your services?
That's an excellent question, Jackie. I work pro bono in honor of my daughter's memory, and part of her legacy is for me to know, for families to know, and for practitioners, for providers to know that this service exists. So, and it is chargeable. However that works for your practice and your boundaries, because I'm informed by being a bereaved parent and living in a different space. That's what supports me. But whatever you feel connected with, it really is more of a business question, and that's very personal and part of your pathway. And there's no shame in charging people. That's part of the practice.
Thanks for that.
Does that help?
Yeah. One of the things is I'm finding is that there's a little bit of a resistance to engage doulas in Australia to a point because of the financial side of it. And for those of us that are actually doing this as a business, as well as absolute passion, but this is our livelihoods as well, that can be a little bit of a barrier. But I really liked at the end you said it's about perseverance and patience and connection. And that's what I'm finding is there is a momentum there. There's an understanding that this role is really, really valuable and it's organic at the moment. But thank you so much for sharing. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You can put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, Toula. I just wanted to say thank you so very, very much for this. As a home funeral guide and end-of-life doula and bereaved mom myself, there were so many parallels between our stories. I just was nodding. So many. And our situations are unique as well. So I just want to thank you for that. And I feel like I thought I knew a lot and I learned so much. So
thank you, Lauren. Sorry for your loss, and thank you for being here and doing this work.
yeah, thank you for sharing your stories and all the others.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Does anybody else have any questions or comments, or if not, we'll start wrapping up.
Hi, my name's Leah. Thank you so much for your story and the work that you do. What I found really what I have a question about and what I feel really curious about was within the hospital setting, you talked about somebody who was on the ethics committee and what it was like to have ethics around what is happening specifically. Is this specific to children? Or is it something that exists, from infancy to elders? And that was all of this was beautiful, and there was something about that I'd love to hear more about.
The ethics committee. I'm learning more myself, and I know it's especially prevalent in infant and child care because there's so many unknowns and conditions. I believe there's ethics committees for adults, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to also explore that myself. It's an excellent question, because there are situations where families, communities have a decision to make, and there might be a conflict, right? Or some insight into what the next steps will be, and what would be best, right? Yeah, that's a great question.
And I'll step in. Oh, sorry, Toula. And I'll step in on that one. His answer is yes. Ethics committees exist in hospitals to make those hard decisions, regardless of the age of the patient. So, for example, if you were admitted to the hospital, coma, no advance directive, no family, or family wasn't agreeing on the situation, et cetera, something like an ethics committee would be brought in to make that decision if someone else wasn't going to. So we have grand rounds, for example, at one of the local hospitals where I live, where they bring up issues that the ethics committee has faced as teachable moments for medical staff.
Yeah, that just there's something about that I find that's just fascinating, and I would love to know more about that. So, and then who are those people that sit on that board? Usually, are they physicians? Are they?
I think we're getting into questions that are not. We got 2 minutes. We got 2 minutes left. While I absolutely hear you and agree with you, it's fascinating. We got 2 minutes left, and that's for another topic. But
got it.
But thank you.
Yeah,
no
actually, there are different folks on the committee. There are ethicists that do advise, but there are different folks on the committee, different positions, including physicians.
And also, just to share a comment from Jackie about this, their ethics committee is usually attached to all hospitals in Australia. Again, irrespective of age, we also have decisional tribunals that at times have to take the decision for e.g. active treatment versus palliative care. So thank you for adding that.
Heard about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Oh, yeah. Fascinating.
Thank you. So, well, thank you so much. And another comment. Thank you, Shannon, for your thank you to us. We appreciate that you came today and engaged. Thank you so much, everyone. Any last question before we wrap up? Oh, well, thank you so much to everybody for being here today. Toula, again, that was amazing. Not only just an amazing talk in general, but how lucky we were to have you to kick off our unpausing of our webinar series for the National Home Funeral Alliance. We will be doing this monthly again, starting this month with Toula being our first speaker. So thanks everyone for sticking with us. Apologies again for the difficulties at the beginning, us starting a little late with the different link going out, but this recording will be shared after we get everything settled in and get that sent out to you. And we just really appreciate your time and space, sharing it with each other today, and coming to hear Toula speak about this very important, just such a beautiful talk today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lilani.
Thank you, everyone. With that, if you want to reach out to Toula, she shared her information, and please feel free to reach out to the NHFA also if you have other questions. Thank you so much.
Be well, everyone. Thank you.